Tech Nuggets, VMware vCenter. VMware vCenter, I've gotten a number of discussions from students that want to play with it. They're being asked by employers to look at it and to understand it and to run some home lab stuff so they can play with it and get to know more about it. VMware offers ESXi, which is a hypervisor, and we'll talk about that in another video. They offer 60-day evaluation licenses, which is plenty of time to get in and get dirty and play with lots and lots and lots of their features in a home lab kind of environment. In fact, I think there's still a possible way to get a free ESXi license. As far as I know, there's no way to get a free vCenter license, although if you were to go to some of the shows and stuff like that, you might be able to get one there. I don't know about that. vCenter kind of is this overarching beast that we install and use to manage multiple ESXi instances. So we talk about data centers and they're running, all this VMware. What does that mean? There's all these marketing PR words that get mixed up in the mess that make it really hard to separate it. Vernacular becomes very important with this discussion. So when it comes to this, we want to be pretty clear. vCenter is it's actually a VM. We call it an appliance, but it's a VM that we install and run to manage connections with all of the other, usually running on actual hardware hypervisors, ESXi in this case. It allows us to have one web interface, and then from that web interface, we can get at all of our other moving parts within VMware. We can manage the virtual networks, the VMs, the hosts, the licensing. All that stuff can be done in one central place, which is why it's called vCenter, because we bring it all into one place, and that's how it works. It gets deployed in a number of different ways. The old way was to run a Windows server, and it was a piece of Windows software that would run on it. And in more recent times, they've come up with a virtual VMware appliance. And we use the term appliance sort of like a toaster, right? It's a single function object. A toaster makes toast. A washing machine washes. A vCenter appliance does vCenter, and that's what it does. So you're not going to do a bunch of other stuff with it. It's really a Linux kernel running a bunch of packages and a web interface. Usually when we use the term appliance, it has a web interface to it, but the term appliance is kind of squishy. It gets used in a number of ways. The way I'm going to demo is going to be installing it. When you go to install it, you actually install it from somewhere else and you push the appliance into your ESXi infrastructure. And then once it's running as a VM, you go to the web interface for vCenter and you turn around and manage the ESXi instance that the appliance is sitting on. It seems very convoluted. It is very chicken and egg. It can be difficult to get at. And I'll go through it. It takes, in my instance, it took about 25 minutes to get done, and about half of that was waiting for it to do its automated things. So let's go on to the practical demo. It'll make more sense, hopefully, as we go along. All right, so in my environment, I've got a piece of hardware that's running ESXi, the hypervisor itself. And this is the installation of the vCenter server appliance. So an appliance is a fancy name for a VM that generally has a web interface. So we talk about appliance this and appliance that. Appliances used to be, a washing machine and a toaster. Appliances now in a virtual concept are a single function, usually VM, but they could be a container, which is a very, very small VM kind of, that provides one service. And so it's a server appliance is the term we use. Vernacular is very important with this kind of thing. So in our case, we're going to go and install it. But you can see there's some other options here. If we had existing vCenter things, we could upgrade them or migrate them or restore them or that kind of thing. And you can see here, we've got an introduction screen that I will positively not read very much of at all, but there's not much on the screen. And we'll move on to next. EULAs are ubiquitous. So we check the little box and we move on. Here's where the first real choice comes in. Are we going to do the embedded platform services controller, which is the VM, the appliance VM that I was just talking about? Or do we have some other way we want to do it? You can see it's deprecated deployment model. And this is effectively, I'm going to stuff it onto a Windows server. That's the way vCenter used to work, and they still give you some of those options. We're going to do the VCSA, which is the term for the vCenter server appliance, VCSA, whatever it is, and we'll go on. And so it's asking, what is my ESXi host. Now, if I had DNS in my environment, I could use the DNS name. We're going to do this without any DNS. We're going to do it. There may be a couple times when it looks like DNS that it's not, but we're going to do it with IP addresses. So this is the IP address of my ESXi server and the root username that I created when I set up the ESXi. It asked me for a root username and a password. So we got to use that same username and password because it's going to, reach out to that box and stuff it on there. And what we see here is it's asking about a SHA-1 thumbprint. It's basically doing an SSH connection. And if you've done SSH in the past, you'll know that the first thing it does the first time you connect is, hey, is this thumbprint right? And it's it generates the thumbprint and that kind of stuff. And it's part of the SSH connection. But that's basically what it's doing in the background, is making sure that it is what you think it is. You go to your ESXi server and get it to show you the thumbprint, and then you can manually compare them. And in really secure environments, it matters. In a test environment, kind of less so. Like, how many things are you going to have on your little teeny network, really? All right, so it's going to ask us, what's the name of the VM? So when we're done, what's it going to be doing up there? So I'm going to name mine vCenter, and this is my home network, so we're going to call it that way, and we're going to give it a password. If you look at the little eyes over here, it's going to give you information about the requirements thereof. My root user didn't have much. The ESXi root user didn't really have a lot of requirements. I could set whatever I wanted, uppercase, lowercase, complexity wise is what I mean. But here it's going to actually mandate some level of complexity. And I've set that, and as long as they match, we'll be okay. We go on to here, and this is deployment sizes. So how big do you want it to be? How many virtual CPUs is it going to use? How much memory will it be allowed to use? And this is the VCSA appliance. How much is it going to use? That's these categories you see here under virtual CPUs and storage. The number of hosts is the number of actual boxes, physical boxes. I only have one, so 10 is kind of overkill. And the number of VMs that I'm going to run, there's no way I'm going to run more than 100 VMs. So tiny is great for me. I'm just fine with that. Storage is also the same way, but you can look over here in the little eye and you can see what that means. Storage is something we manage a little later, so it won't be a big deal. In my test environment, we're going to do tiny, and that's going to be just fine. Most people's test environments will probably be okay. We'll pick a data store. My particular box has 2 different data stores on it, and I'm going to use DS1. I named it after I put it on there. I think it's called Data Store 1 is the default name, so that may be what you see. And if your ESXi server only has 1 data store, then you'll only see 1, and it'll tell you how much is free and how much is used. I like to enable thin disk mode. That means when it creates new VMs, or will create this VM, but it will put out all the drives, because a vCenter has like 12 different hard disks that it uses. I have no idea why, but it does. I've seen them. And you can tell them, go out and use the actual disk space, or you can say, hey, don't use all the disk space, but tell the operating system of the VM's operating system that you have that much space, and it'll use the disk space as it needs it. And this allows us to do something called oversubscribing, which means I can oversubscribe my storage by telling lots of VMs they have more storage space than I actually own. The VMs will all believe they have great big amounts of storage, and if I run out of storage, it'll be bad. But that way the VMs can believe they have lots of storage, and they may or may not actually have it. But that's what enabling thin disk mode does here. We don't really have vSAN at the moment. That may be something I cover later. vSAN is really, really cool, but we don't really have options for that right now, so I'm not super worried about it. We're going to have some networking settings. These are network settings for the appliance. Again, it says optional FQDN, fully qualified domain name. That's a host name that it wants all of. So, Doug.smith.john.com would be a fully qualified domain name. A host name would just be Doug. The fully qualified version is all of that. In our case, we're going to skip it. We're going to do a static. And in my environment, we are 192.168.1.101. And I'm going to give it a subnet and ask for a prefix. A /24 is the same thing as this. Right? If we do it in binary, that's 8 and 8 and 8 and 0. So 8 times 3 is 24, which is how I got to 24. All right, and my default gateway is whatever my default gateway is on my network, which in this case happens to be 1.1, and any DNS servers that I happen to have. So this is so that it can reach out and use them. I don't know if it doesn't say optional. I'm assuming you have to give it one. Usually in a small network, it's going to be the same thing as your, it's your little router NAT box. But if you've created it all inside VMware Workstation, you may have those kind of things inside that network that's created. Common ports, this is how I'm going to get at it later for the web interface. So if you have need to change those, you could. I'm going to leave them the same way, where they are. These numbers on this page, they come from whatever environment you're building it in. So if you're building your stuff inside VMware Workstation, it's going to have its own 192.168 or some private address space that you can do that in, and you'll need to use the numbers that go with that, and you'll be able to see those by looking at the environment you've created for VMware Workstation, and there are virtual networking options in VMware Workstation to do that if you're creating all this in there. Okay, this is just giving you a summary. You can see what's going on, and when I hit finish here, it'll barf everything onto ESXi and it'll charge away. And we will probably do some time compression here just to make life easy for everybody. All right, so you can see here I've successfully deployed vCenter application. It took about 8 or 9 minutes to do it. Your mileage will vary depending on your network speeds and your hard drive speeds and all that other kind of stuff in between. But, if it goes 30 or 40 minutes, I'd be a little surprised, but it might, depending on what's going on. It can take a while to heave all that into the air and get it running. So, you can see our management interface link here is given here, which I can go and put into a browser at some point and be able to see the management interface, which I'll show here in a minute. We hit continue, and it chugs on down the path of introducing me to the appliance and how do I configure the appliance. So we're going to go and configure the appliance, so it goes and retrieves all the stuff. Is SSH enabled into the appliance or not? We can turn it on. We can synchronize with NTP servers if we have those kinds of things. Again, we'd have to have DNS to have some of that work. Don't have to have any of that. Sometimes it's nice to have both of those. SSO stands for single sign-on. SSO, single sign-on. And you'll notice here it just says vSphere local in gray. And that's what we're going to use. And it's going to create a vSphere, if I can spell, local. What that means in vSphere.local, .local is going to say, hey, we don't have a DNS server. We're just going to log in. That's going to make our username administrator at vSphere.local. And we want to set a single sign-on password, which I will set and then confirm. And it will, again, has the same complexity requirements that go with that. If we had an SSO domain, we could join and use credentials from that. We don't, so we're just going to create administrator at vSphere.local, and we'll use that when we go to log in. Chug. We're not going to join the customer experience program. It's okay. Thanks, VMware. And it's going to go push all these choices we've just set up. So it deploys the VCSA, and now it's ready for us to push all the configs. Because you can notice all the other, IP level things that I put in here, and you can see all our other settings. When I say go, you'll not be able to pause. No kidding. And we hit OK, and configuration goes off. And again, we'll probably do a little time compression here to make life easier, as this can take, again, can take a while to get this to do its thing. It's setting up packages and it's pushing configs and all that kind of stuff. So there's some scripting magic in the background that goes to push all of our stuff from the GUI into that. And we'll do some time compression so we don't have to watch it all. All right, so that took, another 10 minutes on my rig. It might take a little longer on yours. But you can also see here that it's giving us the link to, maybe where we need to go to get onto the appliance. This will be the normal web interface that you would use. And we'll hit close. and we'll go to the web interface. All right, so here's my browser, and you can see I've put in 192.168.1.101, which is our vCenter, and Firefox is screaming about it because it's got a self-signed cert. That's normal, you know, this kind of thing. In Firefox, we hit Advance, we hit Accept the Risk and Continue, and you'll never see it again. In Chrome, there'll be similar buttons, and you'll say, sure, let's go, and then you'll see it every time you load it because Chrome doesn't do self-signed certs. It's a security thing. Yeah, it just depends on what you like. Up here, you'll see that we can launch the HTML5 interface, which is what we want. The Flex interface is a fancy way of saying Adobe Flash, which is evil and should not ever be installed if it's possible to avoid it, as it just has Flash has all sorts of security problems. We will use the HTML5 interface, which really will do everything we want it to do. It's not, you know, anything exciting. So I use LastPass, and it is thankfully filled in my administrator at vsphere.local and my password. So it typed it in for me. And I hit login, and we should see vCenter. And it's complaining that I'm not managing my licenses because we're all on eval licenses, which is fine. And it's managing our one data center, which it has at the moment. Now, so what you've got is you've got an appliance that's got vCenter on it, and you say, well, wait a minute, all I can see is myself. That's right. You've got to create a data center, and then you've got to import your ESXi host into your vCenter, which we'll do here in just a second. So at this point, I've got a vCenter that's set up and installed, but we haven't really merged vCenter with the ESXi hypervisor. And so vCenter is not managing anything, right? That's what vCenter is supposed to do, is manage hypervisors, manage ESXi instances. So we're standing here looking at a vCenter with nothing in it. So right click here, and we add a new data center. We call it whatever we want. It's really just a container object. So I guess I'll leave mine named data center just for the lack of nothing else to call it. And, you know, we can open it up and see there's nothing in it. Inside, you have to have at least one data center. That's just the way vCenter works. It's assuming that it's going to be managing multiple ESXis, right? If you only have one ESXi, you probably don't need vCenter. You can just go to the ESXi web interface and do what you need to do. There'll be a few things you can't do, like you can't snapshot and things like that. You have to have vCenter to snapshot. But for the most part, you can do a lot of the different things you really want to do, and it'll work. vCenter is when you want to do a little bit more. I need to manage multiple ESXi, you know, hardware clusters and instances, things like that. So you can see here, I right-clicked on Data Center, and I've got a couple different things I can do. I can add a host, which is an ESXi host. I can add a cluster, which is a variety of machines. And I can add folders in case I want to do more organizational things. You can see I've got different kinds of folders and virtual machines and things like that. We're just going to add a host. So we're going to actually go and add our host that we had before, right? 192.168.1.100. Boom, no big deal. It's going to ask for a username and password. So we're going to use root. We're going to use, the same username and password that we used when we were installing vCenter, right? Because it's the username and password you use to get into that kind of stuff. And so I've got it, you know, put in here. But remember, this is the credentials for the ESXi host. So it's going to check the thumbprint. Should be the same thumbprint we saw last time. Gives us a summary. Not saving it, LastPass. It's going to give us a summary here of what we're going to go do and that kind of thing. It's a host summary. If we have licenses, you know, we may need to assign licenses. That's right now we're on an eval license that'll last 60 days. But if we had multiple licenses, here would be where we could go in and assign licenses, ESXi licenses to the host. Lockdown mode is a security mode. I'm not going to worry about it a lot. Right now I'm going to leave it disabled. It's not really a big deal. Where are we going to put all the VMs? Let's assume our ESXi has VMs. We know it has one, right? It has the vCenter appliance. Where do we put those? And if there were a big tree, remember earlier I could have right-clicked and created additional folders. We could have done that. And I didn't. It's just going to put them all here in Data Center, which is fine for now. We can create other, you know, architecture or hierarchy later if we want. Go get them. We say finish. We can see down here we're watching it add a standalone host, and it'll chug along here. Ta-da! Look at that. And I've got my vCenter that I created. I've also got, I have Conan servers. This is at home, so Conan Exiles. I've got some other servers. I've got a Plex server, but it pulled them all in and dropped them directly into Data Center. We're looking at it in this VMs and templates mode up here at the top, but we can go look at it in VM mode, and it'll show me just, you know, the hosts. So there's my ESXi host, and it shows me the same vCenters. I can also go look at it in data store mode, where I can see my 2 data stores. This is where I renamed my data store. Earlier, it was named Data Store 1, and I right-clicked on it and went to rename and called it something else. So if we had SAN storage or NAS storage or some other kind of remote, either block level or NFS storage, this is where we would go and add it, and we could say things like, you know, add storage and things like that. We would be able to add storage and stuff like that, and data stores and things like that. We can look at data store clusters and folders, and you can actually right-click here and go into the data store if you want to browse. You need to upload files in my data store. I don't have anything on this one. But I could create a folder and upload ISOs into it so that I could have those when I want to build more VMs or things like that. All right, I think this kind of covers the basics of that. This is our networking. I should have gone over that. I apologize. This kind of covers our basics. These are VM network, and it'll show us, you know, what am I connected to. My VMs can access things via the VM network. So when we go back and look at VMs down here, it'll say, what network am I on? I'm in the VM network. Ask me what host I'm on. If I had used host names, like as in I had DNS running, it would show the host name here instead of the IP address. But I didn't have to use DNS for any of this. I did it all with IP addresses, and it'll work fine as long as none of the IP addresses change. All right. All right, well, I hope you've enjoyed our demo of vCenter, and we'll see you for the next Tech Nugget.